Get off this plane right now. You don't belong here with decent people." The words, sharp and venomous, cut through the low hum of the airplane cabin. Every head turned, 100 pairs of eyes fixing on me and my 6-year-old daughter, Amara. We stood frozen in the aisle of the fully boarded flight from Lagos to Abuja, a shabby island in a sea of expensive fabrics and disdainful glances. My worn handbag was clutched to my chest like a shield, and Amara's small hand trembled in mine. The woman who had shouted was a vision of wealth and arrogance, draped in shimmering gold-threaded ankara, her neck and wrists heavy with gold. She stood, blocking our path to our seats, her face contorted in a mask of pure disgust as she pointed a manicured finger at me. It felt as if she was pointing out a piece of filth she had discovered on her shoe. "Madam, please," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding in my ears. "We have tickets. We're just trying to find our seats." "Tickets?" she scoffed, a harsh, grating laugh that made Amara shrink closer to my leg. "How could someone like you possibly afford tickets for this flight? You must have stolen them." Heat flooded my face, a burning wave of shame and indignation. I was acutely aware of my appearance. My dress, though clean, was faded and patched in several places. My shoes were old, the soles painstakingly glued back on just that morning. I had pulled my hair back into a simple, severe bun because a trip to the salon was an unthinkable luxury. But I had earned the money for these tickets. For 6 grueling months, I had worked 3 jobs, scrubbing floors, selling roasted plantain by the roadside, and washing mountains of laundry for wealthy families. Every single naira was a testament to my sweat and sacrifice. "I didn't steal anything," I said, my voice gaining a sliver of strength as I held up our boarding passes. "Please just let us pass." "Security!" the woman shrieked, her voice rising to a theatrical crescendo. "This woman is harassing me. She's a thief, a common thief trying to rob me." A flight attendant rushed over, her professional smile stretched thin over a tense face. "Ma'am, what seems to be the problem?" This beggar is trying to sit in my section," the wealthy woman spat, waving a dismissive hand in my direction. "Just look at her. She probably has lice, diseases. She'll contaminate the whole plane." "Mommy," Amara whispered, her small voice trembling as she tugged on my dress. "Why is that lady being so mean?" I bent down, smoothing Amara's neatly braided hair with a hand that shook uncontrollably. "It's okay, my love. Everything will be fine." But as I looked into my daughter's frightened eyes, I wasn't sure I believed my own words. Murmurs rippled through the cabin. A few passengers looked on with sympathy, but many more were nodding in agreement with the woman. I saw them clutching their designer bags tighter, subtly shifting in their seats as if my poverty was a contagious disease. The flight attendant glanced at our boarding passes, her expression unreadable. "These seats are in economy, ma'am," she said to the wealthy woman, her tone carefully neutral. "They have every right to be on this flight." "Then I want them moved," the woman demanded, her voice ringing with entitlement. "I paid a fortune for my ticket, and I refuse to sit near that." She pointed at me again, her gold rings flashing under the cabin lights. "Madam, all the seats are assigned. Then throw them off the plane." Another voice, a man's this time, boomed from a few rows back. He was a large man, his ample belly straining against the buttons of an expensive agbada. "She's right. Look at them. They don't belong on this plane. They're probably running from the police." "We are not criminals," I said, my voice stronger now, fueled by a desperate anger. The tears I had been holding back finally began to spill over. "I am taking my daughter to Abuja for a medical appointment. A critical appointment at the National Hospital. She has a heart condition." For a brief moment, a hush fell over the cabin. Amara's small hand found mine again, and I squeezed it reassuringly. She had been born with a congenital heart defect, a tiny hole in her heart that made every breath a battle. We had been managing with medication, but a week ago, her doctor in Lagos had delivered the devastating news that her condition was worsening. She needed to see a specialist in Abuja, a renowned surgeon who was our last hope. The appointment was for the next morning. If we missed this flight, we would have to wait another 3 months for an opening, 3 months that Amara might not have. A likely story, the wealthy woman sneered, breaking the silence. These people always have a sob story. Next, she'll be begging us all for money. I am not asking for anything, I choked out, the words catching in my throat. I just want to sit in the seats I paid for. But the tide of opinion had turned against us. More voices joined the chorus of condemnation. Passengers began to complain loudly that we were delaying the flight, that we were causing a disturbance, that we should just leave quietly and stop making a scene. The flight attendant looked increasingly distressed, her eyes darting between me and the growing mob. Please, I begged, the tears now flowing freely down my cheeks. My daughter needs to get to Abuja. This is a matter of life and death. Madam, the flight attendant said, her voice barely a whisper as she avoided my gaze. I think it would be best if you and your daughter disembarked. I can arrange for a refund for your tickets. No! The word tore from my throat, a raw cry of despair. We can't miss this flight. You don't understand. Security is on its way, she said, and I could hear the apology in her voice, even as her words shattered my world. I'm so sorry, but you're causing a disturbance, and the other passengers are uncomfortable. I was the one causing a disturbance? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. All I had done was try to get to my seat. 2 burly airport security officers appeared at the entrance of the plane. They strode down the aisle towards us, their faces grim and unsmiling. This woman needs to be removed from the aircraft, the wealthy woman announced, her voice dripping with triumph. She's disrupting the flight and making threats. I haven't threatened anyone, I protested, but my words were lost in the noise. The officers grabbed my arms, their grips like iron. I felt Amara being pulled away from me. Mommy, she cried out, her small hands reaching for me. Don't touch my daughter. I struggled against their hold, a primal panic surging through me. Please, she's sick, she needs me. They dragged us down the aisle, a spectacle of shame and humiliation. I caught glimpses of the other passengers' faces. Some looked away, their expressions a mixture of guilt and relief. Others stared openly, their eyes cold and judgmental. No one spoke up for us. No one offered a single word of support. You are making a terrible mistake, I said desperately to the flight attendant as we passed her. Check my bag. I have her medical records. We have a critical appointment. I'm sorry, she repeated, and this time I saw tears in her eyes. But her sorrow changed nothing. They escorted us off the plane and back into the bustling terminal. Amara was sobbing uncontrollably now, and I gathered her into my arms, holding her tight as the security officers released us with a stern warning not to cause any more trouble. Through the large terminal window, I watched as the plane, our plane, taxied away from the gate. Inside that metal tube were people who had judged us, condemned us, and discarded us because we were poor. They were on their way to Abuja, to their important meetings and lavish holidays, while we were stranded in Lagos with no money for another ticket and a life-or-death medical appointment less than 24 hours away. I sank onto a nearby bench, Amara curled in my lap, and I finally let the full weight of my despair wash over me. How had it come to this? How had my desperate attempt to save my daughter's life turned into such a public and brutal humiliation? My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from my sister, Ngozi. Did you make the flight? Praying for you both. I couldn't bring myself to reply. How could I tell her that we had been kicked off a plane for the crime of being poor? That all my hard work, all my sacrifice, meant nothing in a world where people like that woman could decide, on a whim, that we were not worthy of basic human decency. I looked down at Amara, her small face buried in my shoulder, her breathing shallow and ragged even at rest. She was the reason I endured it all, the long hours, the aching muscles, the constant hunger. She was my entire world, and I had just failed her in the most spectacular way possible. "Mommy," Amara's voice was a tiny, frightened whisper. "Are we going to miss my doctor?" I kissed the top of her head, my own tears choking me. I couldn't speak, couldn't bring myself to utter the words that would confirm her deepest fears. But as I held my daughter, a strange and unfamiliar feeling began to smoulder in the pit of my stomach, a cold, hard knot of anger that was slowly eclipsing my despair. Those people on the plane, they had no idea who I was. They had no idea what they had just done. And as I stared at the disappearing plane, a single chilling thought echoed in my mind. They would all live to regret it. Every single one of them. I sat on the hard plastic bench, the chaos of Murtala Mohammed Airport swirling around us like a merciless storm. Amara's small body was racked with sobs, her face buried deep into the faded fabric of my dress. Each one of her shuddering breaths was a dagger in my heart, a painful reminder of my failure to protect her. The jeering faces of the passengers, the cold dismissal of the flight attendant, and the iron grip of the security guards replayed in my mind on a cruel loop. Just 3 years ago, I would have been one of them, sitting in a business-class seat, sipping champagne, perhaps even tutting with impatience at the delay. I would have been Mrs. Aduni Okafor, wife of the real estate mogul, Cheek Okafor. I would have worn shoes that cost more than my entire life savings now. And I would have looked at a woman like me with pity, or worse, with the same casual disdain as the woman in the gold ankara. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. I had been cast out of that world so completely that I had become invisible to them, a piece of human debris to be swept aside. But as I rocked my daughter, a different feeling began to take root in the barren soil of my despair. It was a cold, hard anger, a quiet vow that echoed in the deepest chambers of my soul. They had judged me, humiliated me, and threatened my daughter's life for their own comfort and prejudice. They saw a beggar. They had no idea they had just created a storm. A pair of polished black shoes entered my periphery, stopping directly in front of us. I flinched, instinctively pulling Amara closer, my body tensing for another confrontation. I expected to see the stern face of another security guard, ready to tell us we couldn't loiter here either. But when I slowly lifted my gaze, I was met with a pair of kind, troubled eyes. The man was a pilot, his crisp white uniform adorned with 4 golden stripes on the epaulets, indicating his rank as Captain. His name tag read Jamal Bello. He wasn't looking at me with scorn or suspicion, but with a deep, palpable sorrow that took my breath away. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble that was a stark contrast to the shrieking accusations from the plane. "I was the pilot of that flight. I didn't see what happened until we were cleared for takeoff and the cabin crew filed their report. What they did to you, what they allowed to happen, it was a disgrace to this airline and to basic human decency. I am profoundly sorry." The sincerity in his voice was a balm to my raw, wounded spirit. For the first time since this nightmare began, someone in a position of authority was looking at me and seeing a person, not a problem. I could only nod, a lump forming in my throat, preventing any words from escaping. It was a simple apology, but it felt like a lifeline in an ocean of cruelty. Captain Jamal crouched down to be on eye level with Amara, his warm smile causing her sobs to quieten slightly. "And you must be a very brave young lady," he said to her softly. "I promise you, not everyone is like those people on that plane." He then straightened up and held out a thick white envelope. "I know this isn't enough to erase the humiliation you suffered, but please, allow me to fix a small part of it. The next flight to Abuja leaves in 3 hours. There are 2 seats on it, and this will cover the cost, with some left over for a taxi and a decent meal when you land." I stared at the envelope, then back at his face, my mind struggling to process his kindness. I can't accept this," I stammered, the words ingrained in me from months of refusing handouts. of clinging to the last vestiges of my pride. "You can, and you will," he said firmly, but without harshness. "This isn't charity. Consider it a personal apology from me and an advance on the compensation the airline will be paying you once I file my official report. What happened to you was not just rude, it was a violation of your rights as a passenger. You and your daughter were endangered because of prejudice. That flight attendant and the crew who stood by will be held accountable. Now please take it. Your daughter's health is what matters." He gently pressed the envelope into my hand, his fingers briefly closing over mine. It was a simple human touch, yet it felt monumental. As he spoke, his gaze lingered on Amara, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes as he noted her pale complexion and the slight blue tinge to her lips. He seemed about to say something more, but he stopped himself, a professional mask slipping back into place. "The ticket counter is just over there. Tell them Captain Jamal Bello sent you. They will assist you without any trouble," he said, his tone all business now. He gave us one last compassionate look and a nod before turning to walk away, disappearing into the throng of travellers. I stared down at the envelope in my hand, a wave of relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy. We had a chance. We could still make it. I was about to gather our meagre belongings when his voice called out again, stopping me in my tracks. He had turned back, an odd, urgent expression on his face. "Forgive me, Mum, I was so caught up I forgot to ask your name. For my report." I looked up at him, my heart still fluttering with gratitude. "It's Aduni," I said. "Aduni Adebayo." The moment the name left my lips, the colour drained from his face, his professional calm shattered, replaced by a look of utter shock and disbelief. "Adebayo?" he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "You wouldn't happen to be Aduni Okafor, would you? Chike Okafor's ex-wife?" The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the bustling airport noise fading into a deafening roar in my ears. Chike Okafor's ex-wife. The name was a ghost, a phantom identity I had spent 3 years trying to bury under layers of hardship and anonymity. For this stranger, this kind-faced pilot, to utter it here felt like a violation, as if he had peeled back my skin and exposed the raw, scarred tissue beneath. My gratitude evaporated, replaced by a surge of ice-cold fear. My hand tightened on Amara's arm, and I instinctively took a step back, pulling her behind me. "How do you know that name?" I demanded, my voice a harsh whisper. "Who are you? Did he send you?" My mind raced through 1,000 terrifying possibilities. Was this an elaborate trap? Was this man one of Cheek's associates, sent to lull me into a false sense of security before doing something terrible? My ex-husband was a man of immense power and influence. His tentacles ran deep into the fabric of Lagos. It was entirely possible he had people even here, in the heart of the airport, ready to ensure I never reached Abuja. The pilot's kind face fell, his eyes clouding with a sorrow that seemed to swallow the initial shock. He held up his hands in a placating gesture, seeing the raw terror in my eyes. "No, no, God forbid," he said, his voice laced with a genuine pain that cut through my panic. "I am not his friend. The name Okafor. It is a curse in my family." He took a steadying breath, his gaze drifting to a point somewhere beyond me, as if looking into a painful past. "My younger sister Fatima, she was a brilliant architect. 5 years ago, she fell in love with a man, a business partner of your ex-husband's. This man, with Chike's help and financial backing, systematically ruined her. He drained her finances, stole her designs, and left her with nothing but debt and a shattered reputation. We tried to fight him, but Chike's lawyers and connections were a fortress we could not breach. My sister, she lost everything. Her career, her spirit. She took her own life 3 years ago. The story hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. The pilot's grief was a raw, open wound. He wasn't a threat. He was a fellow survivor of the wreckage Chike Okafor left in his wake. "I am so sorry," I whispered, the words feeling utterly inadequate. He nodded, his jaw tight. So when I heard you say Adebayo, and the possibility of Okafor crossed my mind, I had to ask, seeing you and your beautiful daughter being treated like that, it was like watching my sister's story begin all over again. I couldn't walk away. I won't. His expression shifted from sorrow to a grim, urgent intensity. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice. Aduni, you need to listen to me very carefully. A man like Cheeky Okafor does not leave things to chance. The incident on that plane. I don't believe it was random. The woman who accosted you, the way the crew folded so quickly, the immediate arrival of security, it all feels coordinated. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. Coordinated? The thought was terrifying. What are you saying? I breathed, not sure I wanted to hear the answer. I'm saying that woman might have known exactly who you were. I'm saying your ex-husband may have known you were on this flight and arranged a public humiliation to stop you from getting to Abuja. Men like him don't just discard people, they seek to destroy them, to make sure they can never rise again. This appointment your daughter has, it must be more important than you realize. You cannot miss it, but you must also be incredibly careful. You are not safe. His words confirmed a vague, unspoken fear that had been lurking in the back of my mind, a fear that Cheek's cruelty had no limits. The airport, which moments ago had felt like a place of possible escape, now felt like a cage, with unseen predators watching from the shadows. He pressed the envelope firmly back into my hand. Go now, he urged, his eyes scanning the crowded terminal. Do not talk to anyone else. Get your tickets, go straight through security, and do not leave the departure gate until it is time to board. Keep your head down and trust no one. I clutched the envelope, his terrifying warning echoing in my head. I gave him a grateful, terrified look, whispering, "Thank you, Captain," before turning and pulling Amara toward the ticketing counter, my legs unsteady beneath me. My mind was a maelstrom of fear and confusion, but his words had ignited a new sense of purpose. This was no longer just about poverty or prejudice. This was a fight. At the counter, I managed to purchase the last 2 seats on the next flight to Abuja. The boarding passes in my hand, feeling like a lifeline. As the agent handed them to me, I took a deep, shaky breath and allowed myself a moment to scan the terminal, an instinctive primal urge to check for threats. And then I saw him. Across the vast, echoing hall, standing partially concealed behind a concrete pillar, was Samuel Okafor, Cheek's quiet, unassuming younger brother. He wasn't on his phone or reading a newspaper. He was staring directly at me, his face devoid of emotion, his eyes holding the same chilling, possessive coldness as his brother's. He knew. They knew. And with a certainty that froze the very marrow in my bones, I knew this was not the end. It was the beginning of the hunt. The sight of Samuel Okafor sent a jolt of pure, undiluted terror through my veins. The air in my lungs turned to ice, and for a heart-stopping second, I was paralyzed, pinned in place by his cold, unwavering stare. All the blood drained from my face. This wasn't a coincidence. Captain Jamal's words rang in my ears like a fire alarm. Coordinated, arranged, trust no one. This was proof. Cheek's web was real, and I had just blundered right into one of its strands. The instinct for survival, honed over 3 years of poverty and desperation, took over. I broke his gaze, grabbed Amara's hand with a grip so tight she yelped and whispered with an urgency that terrified her. "We have to go, baby. Right now. Walk fast and don't look back." I plunged into the river of travelers, using the chaos as my shield. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel his presence. A cold spot in the warmth of the crowd, a predator who had marked his prey. We moved erratically, weaving between families with overflowing luggage carts and businessmen talking loudly on their phones. Each person was an obstacle, a potential delay that could cost us everything. Amara stumbled, starting to cry from confusion. and fear. "Mommy, where are we going? You're hurting my hand." I couldn't stop to explain. I couldn't risk it. I just pulled her along, my apologies to the people I bumped into lost in the cacophony of the terminal. I risked a single fleeting glance over my shoulder. My heart leaped into my throat. Samuel was on the move. He wasn't running, which was somehow more terrifying. He moved with a calm, deliberate purpose, his eyes scanning the crowd, methodically searching for us. He was closing the distance. Ahead, I saw the glowing signs for the security checkpoint, a gateway to a zone he couldn't easily enter. It was our only hope. The lines were long, snaking back and forth in a frustrating maze of retractable barriers. We'd be trapped, exposed. Panic gave me a reckless idea. Hoisting a crying Amara into my arms, I pushed my way toward the front of the line, my voice cracking with manufactured hysteria. "Please let us through. My daughter is sick, she can't breathe properly. We're going to miss our flight." I was met with a chorus of annoyed grunts and hostile glares, but my genuine distress and Amara's real tears were convincing enough. A few people grudgingly stepped aside, creating a narrow path. I squeezed through, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I reached the front just as the security agent was calling for the next passenger. I didn't hesitate. As I fumbled for our boarding passes, I saw Samuel break into a brisk walk, his face hardening as he realized what I was doing. But it was too late. The barrier separated us. He stopped, his hands shoved into his pockets, and simply watched me, his face a cold blank mask that promised this was far from over. Once through security, I found a secluded corner in the departure lounge and collapsed onto a chair, my entire body trembling from the adrenaline dump. Amara, exhausted from fear and crying, huddled against me, her small body shaking. It was only then, in the sterile, impersonal safety of the gate area, that the full weight of my past came crashing down on me, the memories I had suppressed for so long now flooding my consciousness. I remembered the man Cheek used to be, or at least the man I thought he was. He had swept into my life like a force of nature, all dazzling smiles, extravagant gifts, and intoxicating promises of a future filled with love and luxury. For a while, the dream was real. We lived in a palatial house in Lekki, a pristine white mansion with a swimming pool and a garden where Amara would chase butterflies. I wore designer clothes, drove a Range Rover, and hosted parties for Lagos's elite. I had willingly ignored the subtle warning signs that began to appear. The frequent late-night business meetings he returned from smelling of expensive, unfamiliar perfume. The cold, dismissive anger in his eyes whenever I dared to question him. I had curated my own blissful ignorance, polishing the surface of our perfect life while rot festered just beneath. My life hadn't been a fairy tale. It had been a beautifully constructed, gilded cage, and I had been its most willing prisoner. The first true cracks in that cage appeared not with another woman, but with our own child. Amara's heart condition, diagnosed when she was just 2, should have united us in our love and fear for her. Instead, it became a wedge. Cheek became resentful of the mounting medical bills and the endless appointments that interrupted his social life. He grew cold, distant. Then came the final soul-shattering betrayal. My discovery of his numerous affairs, the proof on his phone of a life built on lies and deceit, funded by money that should have been for Amara's care. When I confronted him, I expected anger, perhaps even denial. I never expected the venomous cruelty he unleashed. He laughed in my face, accused me of being the unfaithful one, and with a chilling casualness, questioned if Amara was even his child. 2 weeks later, while I was at a doctor's appointment with our daughter, he changed the locks and had my belongings thrown onto the street. He had used our child, our beautiful, fragile Amara, as the ultimate weapon to destroy me. And now, years later, his brother was hunting me through an airport. Why? What secrets were waiting in Abuja that he was so desperate to protect? A metallic voice from the intercom announced that our flight was now boarding, pulling me from the abyss of my memories. It was time. Time to fly into the heart of the storm and find out. Wow, what a whirlwind. Aduni has escaped for now, but she's just realised this is a bigger conspiracy than she ever imagined. It's stories like this that really make you think. If you're finding yourself on the edge of your seat, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and have hit that like button so you don't miss what happens next. And please share this with a friend who loves a story that grips you from the very start. We're just getting started, and I have a question for you all. Looking at Aduni's situation, what would you have done the moment you saw Samuel in the airport? Would you have run, confronted him, or tried to find Captain Jamal for help? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Oh, and before we dive into the next chapter, I'd love to see where in the world you're watching from. It's amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now, let's see if Aduni can finally get on that plane. The walk from the gate to the plane was the longest of my life. Every step was fraught with tension, my senses on high alert. I kept Amara tucked tightly against my side, my arm a protective barrier around her small shoulders, and forced myself to walk with a purpose I did not feel. My eyes darted around, scanning the faces of our fellow passengers, my heart constricting with suspicion at every man in a sharp suit. Every individual who held my gaze for a second too long. The flight attendants offered the same generic, polite smiles as the crew on the first flight, but their greetings felt hollow, masking a potential threat. Finding our seats felt like reaching a tiny fortified island in a hostile sea. The memory of being violently dragged down an identical aisle was a raw, vivid wound, and I half expected the woman in gold Ankara to materialize in the seat next to us. I fumbled with Amara's seatbelt, my hands trembling so much it took 2 tries to click it into place. I didn't allow myself to exhale, to relax even a fraction of an inch, until the heavy cabin door thudded shut and the powerful whine of the engines began to build. Only then, as the plane hurtled down the runway and lifted into the sky, did I feel a sliver of hope. We were airborne, leaving Lagos and Samuel Okafor far below. As the sprawling, chaotic cityscape of Lagos shrank beneath us, replaced by a serene blanket of white clouds, a fragile sense of peace began to settle in my heart. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I felt a degree of safety. The constant, grinding fear that had been my companion on the ground lessened its grip. Amara, her earlier terror now replaced by the pure, unadulterated joy of a child on an adventure, pressed her face against the window, her soft gasps of delight a soothing melody to my frayed nerves. "Look, Mommy, the clouds look like soft yams," she exclaimed, her finger tracing their shapes on the cool glass. A genuine smile touched my lips. Watching her, so innocent and resilient, I felt a powerful surge of love that solidified my resolve. This was why I endured it all. Her life, her future, her simple, unburdened happiness was worth any price. But my respite was short-lived. As Amara's attention remained fixed on the world outside, my mind inevitably began to churn, wrestling with the terrifying puzzle Chiki had created. Why this doctor? Why was he so petrified of this specific appointment in Abuja? A chilling memory began to surface. One I had long dismissed. It was from the 3-month period Chika had temporary custody right after our separation. He had unilaterally fired Amara's trusted pediatric cardiologist and hired a new one, a man I had never met claiming he was more prestigious. When I finally regained custody, Amara was visibly weaker. Chiki had brushed off my frantic concerns as the ravings of a bitter, hysterical woman. I had believed him, blaming the divorce for her decline. But now I wondered. The feeling started as a subtle prickle on the back of my neck, a primal sense of being watched that transcended the normal confines of a crowded airplane cabin. It wasn't the overt, menacing stare of Samuel. This was something far more unnerving. A few rows ahead of us across the aisle sat a man. He was of average height and build, dressed in a simple but forgettable brown shirt, the kind of person who could easily fade into any background. He appeared to be deeply engrossed in a newspaper, but his posture was all wrong. The paper was held just a fraction too high, and in the faint reflection of the window I could see his eyes, not scanning the page but darting towards us every few seconds. He was an observer, a ghost meant to blend in. The realization sent a fresh wave of panic through me, cold and sharp. They hadn't been stopped at the gate. They had a contingency plan. There was someone on the plane with us. My protective instincts flared, and I shifted in my seat, pretending to fuss over Amara's blanket, using my body to shield her from his view as much as possible. I was trapped, suspended 30,000 feet in the air, with an agent of my tormentor just meters away, and there was absolutely nothing I could do but wait. A forgotten conversation, sharp and unwelcome, suddenly pierced the fog of my fear. It was a phone call from that awful 3-month period. I had called to speak to Amara and Cheeky had answered, his voice thick with irritation. In the background, I could hear Amara's weak, plaintive cry. "Daddy, my tummy hurts so much." Cheek's reply had been impatient, devoid of any paternal warmth. "It is the new medicine, Amara. The doctor said you must take it. Stop being a baby." A new medicine? Dr. Adeyemi, her lifelong cardiologist, had never prescribed a new medication. When I had confronted Cheek about it later, he had exploded in a rage, screaming that I was trying to interfere with the superior care he was providing. He forbade me from contacting the new doctor, threatening to file a court order against me for harassment. The memory, once just another example of his controlling behavior, now seemed sinister. What was in that medicine? Why was it a secret? The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, a smooth, calm tone announcing our initial descent into Abuja. The seatbelt sign pinged on. Across the aisle, the man in the brown shirt folded his newspaper with meticulous care, retrieved his phone and began to type. I couldn't see the screen, but I didn't need to. A message was being sent. Our arrival was being announced. I had escaped one trap only to fly willingly and helplessly into the next. The gentle bump of the plane's wheels touching down on the tarmac in Abuja offered no comfort, only a sickening lurch in the pit of my stomach. The door to my cage was about to open, and the hunters were waiting. My mind, sharpened by pure adrenaline, raced to formulate a plan. A direct flight to the exit would be predictable. They would be waiting there. I needed to be someone else, somewhere else. I whispered to a weary Amara, "My love, we're going to play a game. It's called the quiet game. Hold my hand as tight as you can, and don't speak to anyone, okay? Not until I say the game is over." She nodded, her large, trusting eyes searching my face for reassurance I did not feel. As the seatbelt sign switched off, the man in the brown shirt was instantly on his feet, moving into the aisle and positioning himself a few places ahead, a strategic move to block my exit or to ensure he would be right behind me. I took a deep breath, pulled the thin, patterned scarf from my handbag, and wrapped it around my hair and the lower half of my face, mimicking the style of many devout women in the north. It was a flimsy disguise, but it might just be enough to make them hesitate. As the doors opened and the tide of passengers began to flow out, I hung back, letting a dozen people get between me and the man in brown. I kept Amara on my far side, away from the aisle, using my own body as a shield. When we finally stepped onto the jet bridge, I saw him waiting just ahead, his back to me, pretending to check his phone but clearly expecting me to pass. This was my only chance. Just as I drew level with him, I let out a small cry and allowed my worn handbag to slip from my shoulder. Its meagre contents, Amara's tattered teddy bear, a half-empty water bottle, a folded wrapper, tumbled and rolled across the floor in a pathetic display of clumsiness. The immediate effect was exactly what I had hoped for. Passengers behind me grunted in annoyance, forced to halt, creating a sudden impenetrable human dam. The man in brown turned, his face a mask of irritation, but he was trapped behind the logjam. It bought me maybe 10 seconds. It felt like an eternity. So sorry, I muttered, scooping up my belongings with frantic speed, not caring that the teddy bear was now dusty. I grabbed Amara's hand and hurried on, melting back into the forward-moving crowd, my heart hammering against my ribs. I did not look back. The arrivals hall at Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport was a vast, echoing cavern of polished floors and hurried footsteps. It promised the anonymity of a crowd, but also offered 1,000 places for an enemy to hide. My eyes darted everywhere at once, from the distant green exit signs to the faces of the people milling about. I avoided the brightly lit central areas, keeping to the periphery where the shadows were deeper. Then I saw him again. The man in brown was standing near the baggage carousel, speaking urgently into his phone, his head swiveling as he scanned the crowd. He was angry. My little diversion had cost him, but he was now actively hunting for me. I ducked behind a large family struggling with a mountain of luggage, using them as a moving screen as I shuffled towards the main exit leading to the taxi rank. Freedom was just 100 feet away, a wall of sunlit glass doors. But as I drew closer, my hope curdled into dread. A second man, larger and more muscular than the first, stepped away from the wall and positioned himself directly in front of the main exit, his arms crossed over his chest. He wasn't waiting for anyone. He was guarding the door. They had me boxed in. My breath hitched. There was nowhere left to run. A gentle but firm hand touched my arm. I flinched as if struck by lightning, spinning around with a strangled cry, my body coiled to either fight or flee. A woman stood before me, her presence an island of calm in my sea of panic. She was tall and elegant, dressed in a sharply tailored navy blue suit that spoke of wealth and authority. Her expression was not threatening but serious, her intelligent eyes holding a look of quiet urgency. "Mrs. Aduni Okafor?" she asked, her voice low and steady, a stark contrast to the chaos in my head. The name my ghost name, sent a fresh wave of fear through me. "It's Adebayo now," I whispered, my voice hoarse. The woman gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "I am aware. My name is Barrister Folake Williams. A certain pilot was concerned you might be flying into a storm. He suggested I offer you a more suitable shelter." Her eyes flickered towards a nondescript door marked "Staff Only." "I think it is time we left." I stared at her dumbfounded. A lawyer? Sent by Captain Jamal? Before I could find my voice to ask the million questions screaming in my mind, she leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that made my blood run cold. "The men watching you are Cheek's employees, as was the woman who had you removed from your first flight. Her name is Blessing Nwachukwu. She is not just an acquaintance. She is one of your ex-husband's primary mistresses." My mind snagged on the name, catching like a thread on a nail. Blessing Nwachukwu. It wasn't the name of a stranger. It was the name of a woman Chike had once introduced as a family friend, a sophisticated art dealer I had entertained in my own home, a woman who had smiled at me across my own dinner table. The betrayal was so profound, so personal, it left me breathless. Folake's urgent hiss, "Aduni, we have to go now," was the only thing that broke the spell. She grabbed my arm, her grip firm and steadying, and pulled me and a bewildered Amara towards the staff door. Folake spoke a few sharp, coded words into a security intercom. A buzzer sounded, and the door clicked open, revealing a sterile, concrete service corridor. Our footsteps echoed loudly in the confined space as we moved, a frantic, rhythmic beat of escape. We emerged moments later into the blinding afternoon sun of a private parking area. I risked one last glance back at the terminal. Through the shimmering glass I could see them, the man in brown and his muscular associate, standing at the exit, their faces contorted with the furious confusion of predators who had lost their prey. A sleek black car with tinted windows glided to the curb, and Folake hustled us inside. The doors locked with a heavy, satisfying thud, and the car sped away, leaving the airport and Chica's suffocating influence behind us. The cool, quiet interior of the car felt like a different universe. Amara, finally sensing that the immediate danger had passed, laid her head on my lap and drifted into an exhausted sleep. I, however, was a raging storm of questions and emotions. I turned to the impeccably dressed woman in the driver's seat. "His mistress," I choked out, the words tasting like poison. He sent his mistress to humiliate me and my daughter in front of a plane full of people. Why? What is going on? Who are you and how did you know to find me? Folake met my frantic gaze in the rearview mirror, her own eyes calm and compassionate, but with a steely edge. "My firm has been investigating your ex-husband for the better part of a year, Aduni. He has financially ruined several of our clients. We monitor his businesses, his associates, and his extracurricular activities. We received an anonymous tip this morning from a highly reliable source within the airline. He told us Chica's known mistress was orchestrating a scene to have his ex-wife removed from a flight to Abuja, a flight that would get her to a critical medical appointment with her daughter. When we connected the dots, we understood that he was no longer just hiding assets. He was actively suppressing evidence of a far more serious crime." "Evidence?" I repeated, my voice hollow. "Evidence of what?" We were gliding through the wide, orderly streets of Abuja now, but the city's superficial tranquility felt like a cruel joke. "Evidence of a crime that makes financial fraud look like a childish prank," Folake said, her voice grim. She navigated the car into a discreet, high-walled compound, parking before a small, elegant guest house. Inside, she led us to a comfortable sitting room, ensuring Amara was settled on a sofa before she turned to me, her expression one of profound gravity. "Aduni, I need you to prepare yourself. What I'm about to tell you is monstrous. We have reason to believe that during the 3 months Cheek had temporary custody of your daughter, he was deliberately and systematically mismanaging her medical care. The sudden drastic decline in her health wasn't caused by the emotional trauma of the divorce. It was caused by calculated, malicious medical neglect. That new medicine he was forcing on her? Our preliminary investigation suggests it was, at best, a placebo, and at worst, something that actively worsened her condition. He was making her sicker, Aduni. He was poisoning your child to build a case that you were an unfit mother." The room spun, the polished floor seeming to drop away beneath my feet. A wave of vertigo and nausea washed over me so intensely that I had to clutch the arm of the sofa to keep from fainting. Every memory from that period, Amara's constant fatigue, her pale skin, her plaintive cries about her aching tummy, all clicked into place, forming a picture of unimaginable evil. Chaik hadn't just been a bad father. He had been a monster, torturing his own child, using her fragile body as a weapon in his twisted war against me. He was trying to kill her. The words were a ragged whisper, torn from the depths of my soul. Folake's eyes were filled with a deep, sorrowful pity. We believe his initial plan was to make her just sick enough to ensure he won permanent custody. The doctor you're here to see, Dr. Adebayo, is one of the only specialists in West Africa with the forensic expertise to prove such a thing in a court of law. That is why Chiki could not, under any circumstances, allow you to get here. But Aduni? His motives evolved. It became about more than just custody. She slid a manila folder across the coffee table towards me. 3 weeks ago, your ex-husband took out a 50 million naira life insurance policy on Amara. It pays out if she dies from complications related to her known heart condition within the next 2 years. He is the sole beneficiary. The file lay on the coffee table between us, a deceptively ordinary object containing the architecture of an evil so profound it defied human comprehension. My mind tried to reject it, to find some other explanation, but the words on the page, 50 million naira, sole beneficiary Chike Okafor, were an undeniable soul-crushing truth. A sound tore from my throat, a ragged primal scream of a grief so deep it felt like it was ripping me apart from the inside. This wasn't just neglect, it was a business plan. Amara's life had been turned into a commodity, her death a potential windfall. Every memory of her suffering over the past few years replayed in my mind, now tainted with this new horrific knowledge. The nights I had spent sponging her feverish body, the days she was too weak to get out of bed, the fear I felt with every laboured breath she took. Cheek had not only caused it, he had been banking on it. The guilt was a physical force, a crushing weight on my chest that made it impossible to breathe. I had blamed myself, my poverty, the stress of our new life. How could I have been so blind? I had been living with a monster for 7 years, and I had never once seen the demon lurking behind his charming smile. Folek allowed my raw agony to fill the room for a long moment, her silence a respectful acknowledgement of a pain too immense for words. Then, her voice, calm and incisive, sliced through the fog of my despair. Aduni, I know this feels impossible, but I need you to listen to me. Your grief is a weapon, and we are going to aim it. We have to move forward with cold, calculated precision. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, your appointment with Dr. Adebayo is the single most important event in this entire affair. His independent medical evaluation will be the cornerstone of our case. I will have private security escort you there and back. After the appointment, we will meet with my legal team and an agent from the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. The EFCC has a strong financial case against Chike, but your testimony, combined with Dr. Adebayo's official report, will escalate this from fraud to attempted murder and child endangerment. We will not stop until he has lost everything. Aduni, his freedom, his reputation, and every last naira he has ever stolen. Her words were a lifeline. The clear, strategic plan was an anchor in the turbulent waters of my horror. The image of Chike, stripped of his power and arrogance, forced to answer for what he did to our daughter, was a flickering candle in my suffocating darkness. The broken, weeping woman on the sofa began to recede, and in her place someone else began to emerge. Someone forged in the fires of betrayal, someone colder, harder, and infinitely more dangerous. The shame that had been my shadow for 3 long years was incinerated in a blaze of pure, righteous fury. I looked up at Folek, my tears having carved clean tracks through the dust of my old life, a new chilling light glinting in my eyes. "Why?" I asked, my voice no longer trembling. "Why are you this invested? This is more than just a case for you." A small, humorless smile touched Foleke's lips. "It is," she confirmed, her gaze unflinching. 3 years ago, my husband of a decade left me. His excuse was that my career had made me hard, that I was no longer the woman he fell in love with. A month later, he married the woman he had been secretly seeing for years. Her name was Blessing Nwachukwu. The name dropped into the silent room like a stone into a still pond. We were not just lawyer and client. We were sisters in a war we hadn't known we were fighting, against a common enemy. "We are going to burn their world to the ground," I said, the words a quiet, deadly vow. That night, sleep was an impossibility. I sat in an armchair in the guest house watching the steady, innocent rise and fall of Amara's chest as she slept peacefully. My love for her was a physical ache, a fierce, protective fire in my soul. For the first time since Cheek had thrown us out, I did not feel like a victim. I felt like a soldier on the eve of a decisive battle. Suddenly, my phone buzzed on the nightstand, the screen illuminating with an unknown number. My blood ran cold. I hesitated, every instinct screaming not to answer, but I had to know. I stepped into the hallway and accepted the call. "Aduni!" Cheek's voice, as smooth and familiar as my own heartbeat, slithered into my ear. "Don't sound so surprised. I have my ways. I know you're in Abuja." I said nothing, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone. "I am going to give you one chance to walk away from this," he continued, his tone dangerously calm. "There will be 1 million naira in your sister's account by morning. Take it, take Amara, and disappear. Forget the doctor. Forget everything. If you don't, I swear on my life, you will lose her for good. And this time, you won't just be thrown off a plane, you'll wish you had been." The line went dead, the silence he left behind more menacing than any threat. Can you believe the audacity? Calling her directly to threaten her after everything he's done. This story just keeps getting more intense. The battle lines have been drawn, and Aduni has a powerful new ally in Folak. If you are as invested in seeing Chika get what he deserves as I am, please do me a favour and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on those notifications. You won't want to miss a single second of what comes next. Now I have to ask you all, after receiving a threat like that directly from Chike, would you still go to the doctor's appointment? Or would you take the money and run to protect your child from immediate danger? It's an impossible choice. Let me know what you would do in the comments. The stakes have never been higher, and tomorrow morning, everything changes. The dead silence on the other end of the line was more terrifying than any of Chika's threats. It was the sound of a sealed fate, a door slamming shut on any possibility of a peaceful retreat. The words, "You will lose her for good," were designed to paralyze me, to trigger the deepest, most primal fear a mother can know. For a fleeting, cowardly moment, the thought of the 1,000,000 naira, of grabbing Amara and vanishing into the vastness of Nigeria, was a seductive whisper. A life of quiet poverty was infinitely better than no life at all. But then the image of Amara's small, trusting face, pale and listless in her bed, flashed in my mind's eye. I saw the 50 million naira insurance policy, a death warrant disguised as a financial document. My fear did not recede, but it was consumed by a righteous, white-hot inferno of rage. This wasn't a choice between fighting and running. It was a choice between justice for my child and allowing a monster to purchase my silence. He wasn't offering me safety. He was offering me a bribe to become complicit in his crimes against our own daughter. I walked back into the living room, my hand shaking but my voice clear, and told Falake exactly what he had said. A grim, almost triumphant smile touched Folake's lips. "He's rattled," she said, her tone sharp and analytical. "And he is making mistakes. He just threatened a key witness, a crime we will add to his growing list. He also admitted to having access to large, untraceable sums of money, which the EFCC will be delighted to hear." She was already on her phone, her voice a low, authoritative command as she arranged for a significant increase in our security. "We are not running, Aduni. We are not hiding. Tomorrow we are walking into the National Hospital with our heads held high, and we are going to arm ourselves with the truth." The next morning, the guest house transformed from a safe house into a staging ground for a military operation. 2 large, broad-shouldered men with the stoic faces of former soldiers arrived at dawn. They flanked us as we walked to a different nondescript SUV. The journey through Abuja's morning traffic was a masterclass in tension. Every car that lingered in the rearview mirror felt like a threat. Every motorcyclist who swerved too close seemed to be an assassin. I held Amara close, my body a rigid shield, while she, blissfully unaware, chattered on about the big hospital and the hope that this new doctor could finally give her the magic medicine that would let her run and play like other children. The National Hospital was an imposing beacon of order and authority, its clean, modern lines a stark contrast to the crumbling chaos of the underfunded clinics I had been forced to frequent in Lagos. Our security detail ensured we were met with a level of efficiency and respect I hadn't experienced in years. We were personally escorted to a private consulting wing, bypassing the crowded general waiting areas. Dr. Tunde Adebayo was a man in his late 50s with piercingly intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through me. His demeanour was brisk, professional, and utterly no-nonsense. He began his consultation by examining Amara, his clinical approach softened by a surprising gentleness. His hands were warm and steady as he listened to her heart, and his smile as he spoke to her was genuine, putting her immediately at ease. Once the physical examination was complete, he turned his full, formidable attention to me and the thick file of medical records I placed on his desk. He listened intently, his face unreadable, as I recounted the timeline of Amara's health, my voice never wavering as I detailed the 3 months she had spent in her father's sole custody. Dr. Adebayo spread the various medical reports across his large desk, arranging them in chronological order. A deep frown creased his brow as he compared the detailed, meticulous notes from Amara's original cardiologist with the shockingly sparse and vague reports from the Dr. Cheek had hired. "There are significant discrepancies," he murmured, his focus absolute. "A sudden and medically unjustifiable increase in her diuretic dosage here, followed by a complete cessation of her primary ACE inhibitor. It makes no clinical sense." He then picked up a prescription slip from the file provided by Cheek's doctor. "You mentioned your ex-husband told you Amara was taking a new medicine, which he claimed was causing stomach aches," he asked, his sharp eyes flicking up to meet mine. I nodded, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs. "Yes. He said the new doctor prescribed it for her." Dr. Adebayo looked down at the slip, then back up at me, and in that instant his professional detachment vanished, replaced by an expression of such cold, controlled fury that it sent a shiver down my spine. "Mrs. Adebayo," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "this prescription is for a low but consistent dose of digoxin. In a healthy child, the dose might be negligible. But for a child with Amara's specific form of ventricular septal defect, it is a cardiotoxin. It would not treat her condition. It would systematically weaken the heart muscle, induce arrhythmia, and create the precise symptoms of a rapid, catastrophic deterioration. This wasn't neglect. This was a documented, methodical poisoning. The word poisoning landed in the center of the sterile consulting room and shattered the world as I knew it. It was a word of such pure, premeditated evil that it defied belief. Yet it was also the key, the one piece of information that made every other insane detail of the past 3 years click into horrifying focus. I did not scream. I did not collapse. The capacity for such normal reactions had been burned out of me. Instead, a terrifying, unnatural calm washed over me, the kind of stillness that precedes a devastating storm. The last, lingering ghost of the naive woman who had once loved Chike Okafor disintegrated into ash, and in its place stood a mother whose child had been marked for death. I met Dr. Adebayo's furious, compassionate gaze, my own eyes dark and empty of tears. "Can you prove it?" My voice was flat, devoid of inflection. "Can you document this in a way that no high-priced lawyer, no corrupt judge, no one in this country can ever dispute?" He gave a single sharp nod, his face a mask of grim resolve. "Mrs. Adebayo, this file is no longer just a medical record. It is evidence in a criminal investigation. What I have uncovered here is a methodical clinical attempt to induce cardiac failure. I am legally and morally obligated to report this. I will prepare a full medical legal report that will be unassailable. It will be the nail in his coffin. Before we deal with the law, we must deal with the patient," Dr. Adebayo said, his tone shifting seamlessly back to that of a physician, focused on the small child sitting on the examination table. "I need to admit Amara immediately for at least 48 hours. We will run a full toxicology screen to determine the extent of the poisoning and a new series of echocardiograms to assess the damage to her heart. The positive news, he added, his stern expression softening as he looked at Amara, is that the heart of a child is a remarkable thing. It wants to heal. Now that we know what we're fighting, we can stop the poison and start the recovery. I am optimistic that with the correct treatment, which we will begin today, her prognosis is excellent. He looked back at me, his eyes conveying a chilling truth. You need to understand, you got her here in the nick of time. A few more months of her father's medication, and she would have suffered catastrophic and irreversible heart failure. The words were both a validation and a horror. My desperate, humiliating journey had not just been to get a diagnosis, it had been to save my daughter from a slow, calculated murder. Leaving Amara in the care of the hospital's pediatric unit, surrounded by kind nurses and the quiet beeps of machines that would protect her, was the hardest thing I had ever done. But it was also the act that freed me to do what came next. Folake drove us in silence to her law firm, a fortress of glass and steel in Abuja's central business district. In a polished conference room overlooking the city, a man in a tailored suit was waiting. He introduced himself as Agent Kazim from the EFCC. He had the tired, cynical eyes of a man who swam in the cesspool of human greed for a living, but he listened with an unwavering and intense focus as I unspooled the entire sordid story from the first day I met Cheek to the menacing phone call the night before. I held nothing back. Folake followed, providing the legal architecture for my narrative, presenting the evidence of the insurance policy, the financial crimes, and blessing Nwachukwu's direct involvement. The final devastating blow was the encrypted preliminary report from Dr. Adebayo, which Folake projected onto a large screen. The words cardiotoxin and methodical poisoning glowed in the dim room. Agent Kazim read every word of the doctor's report, his cynical expression slowly hardening into one of cold, decisive fury. He shut the laptop with a sharp click that echoed in the silent room. "This changes the entire timeline," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "We were building our financial case to be executed in a few weeks. But this is attempted murder. This is witness intimidation of the highest order. Your ex-husband is not just a flight risk. He is a clear and present danger to you and your child. His threat to you last night proves he is cornered and is actively trying to eliminate loose ends. We are not waiting. We are moving on him tonight." The word hung in the air. "Tonight," I whispered, my head spinning. "Tonight," Kazim affirmed, his eyes glinting. "We are securing emergency, no-knock warrants for all known properties as we speak. We will conduct simultaneous, coordinated raids on his Lekki residence, his corporate headquarters in Victoria Island, and Mrs. Nwachukwu's service apartment in Ikoyi. We will seize every file, every computer, every device." He leaned forward, his gaze locking onto mine. "But men like Chaik are smart. The most damning evidence won't be in a filing cabinet. You lived in that house. I need to know where he felt safest, where he would keep the things he never wanted the world to see. A hidden safe, a secret office, a panic room. We need to strike fast and hard. Tell me everything." I closed my eyes and the house materialized in my memory, every hallway, every room, every secret hiding place as familiar to me as the lines on my own hand. It was a phantom limb, a part of my life that had been violently amputated but still ached with a phantom pain. I began to speak, my voice steady and precise. A surgeon mapping out an incision. His main study, the one on the second floor with the mahogany desk, is a performance, a stage for visiting business partners. His real office is in the basement. I saw the flicker of interest in Agent Kazim's eyes. He had it built 3 years ago, just before our separation. He told me he needed a completely soundproofed space for sensitive international calls. It has its own ventilation, a dedicated power supply, and a reinforced steel door. You will find that door in the wine cellar, hidden behind a large movable rack of ridiculously expensive French Bordeaux. The details poured out of me, a torrent of suppressed observations. But the heart of his operation, the things he values most, won't be in the basement. They're in the safe. It's in the upstairs study, behind a huge, gaudy painting of boats on the Lagos Lagoon at sunset. He once told me, after too much whiskey, that the greatest trick was to hide your treasure in the most obvious place of all. He will be in the basement, but his soul is in that safe. With the final critical piece of the puzzle in his possession, Agent Kazim departed, leaving behind a silence in the conference room that was heavier and more charged than any sound. For Folake and me, the wait began. It was the longest night of my life. I paced the length of the room, the plush carpet unable to soften the harsh, frantic energy coursing through my veins. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, the lights of Abuja twinkled, a city full of lives that were not currently imploding. My mind was a chaotic slideshow of images, EFCC agents in tactical gear smashing through the ornate front doors I had once painstakingly chosen, the terrified faces of the household staff who had once served me, the violent desecration of the home where I had rocked my baby to sleep. The satisfaction was a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth, mingled with the profound, aching sorrow for the beautiful lie I had once believed in. Folake was my anchor in the storm, preternaturally calm as she monitored a stream of encrypted messages on her phone. "All 3 teams are in position," she said, her voice a low, steady murmur. "They are moving in perfect sync. He won't have a chance to warn a soul." The first message confirming contact arrived just after midnight. Folake's lips curled into a small, cruel smile. "They have blessing," she announced, the satisfaction in her voice palpable. "Found her in her apartment trying to flush pages from a handwritten ledger down the toilet. It seems her composure under pressure is somewhat lacking when she doesn't have an airplane full of people to back her up." A few minutes later, another update confirmed the corporate office was secured, its servers and records confiscated. But all our focus was on the Lekki mansion. The EFCC team leader patched a call through to Folake's speakerphone, his voice a tense professional crackle. "We are in. The house is secure. We've found the basement office exactly as described. We are breaching it now. A second team is proceeding to the upstairs study." I stopped pacing and stood frozen, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles were bone white. I held my breath, listening to the silence on the other end of the line, a silence that represented the final violent moments of Chike's reign. I could practically hear the splintering of wood, the authoritative shouts of the agents, and the deafening crash of a king falling from his throne. A lifetime later, the team leader's voice returned, the tension gone, replaced by the grim, triumphant tone of a successful hunt. "We have him, and we have it all." He was in the basement with an industrial shredder and a small furnace, trying to burn everything. We stopped him mid-act. The ledgers, the hard drives, detailed records of bribes to port authorities and politicians, it's all here. He paused and his voice lowered. "And we found the insurance policy, the original signed 50 million naira policy on Amara Okafor. It was in a medical lockbox, right next to a full tray of labelled vials of digoxin." Another beat of silence. "Tell Mrs. Adebayo he is being brought out in handcuffs now." Folake disconnected the call and turned to me, her eyes shining with a fierce, brilliant light. "It's over, Aduni. He is finished." A wave of relief, so powerful and absolute that my legs gave out from under me, washed through my body. I sank into the nearest chair, the fight, the fear, the adrenaline finally draining away, leaving a hollow, echoing emptiness. It was over, but as I stared out at the dark, sleeping city, I knew that this was just the end of the beginning. The battle was won, but the long public war for justice, The trial was still to come, and I would have to find the strength to face my monster one last time. The fall of Chika Okafor was not a quiet affair. It was a media supernova. The story exploded across every news channel, every blog, every newspaper in the country. The headlines were sensational. The Lekki monster. Billionaire poisons daughter for payout. The woman who toppled an empire. Overnight, I was transformed from an anonymous, struggling mother into a national symbol of survival. Messages of support flooded in from around the world, and women's rights organizations hailed me as a hero. But fame is a double-edged sword. For every message of support, there was a venomous comment online from those who called me a liar, a vindictive ex-wife, a gold digger playing the victim. Folic became my fierce protector, shielding me from the worst of the noise, reminding me that the court of public opinion was fickle, but the court of law dealt in facts. My own focus remained squarely on the only thing that mattered. I spent every waking moment at the hospital, sitting by Amara's bedside, reading her stories and watching with a heart full of hope as the colour returned to her cheeks and the light reignited in her eyes. The poison was gone. My daughter was coming back to me. The trial, held 6 weeks later, was the most watched legal proceeding in recent Nigerian history. The courtroom buzzed with an electric tension, a circus of journalists and spectators hungry for drama. When they led Chika into the dock, he was almost unrecognizable. The bespoke suits and arrogant confidence were gone, replaced by a drab prison uniform and the hollowed-out eyes of a man whose world had crumbled to dust. He could not meet my gaze. Blessing Nwachukwu sat a few feet away. Her glamorous facade stripped away to reveal a pale, terrified woman. When it was my turn, I walked to the witness stand, not with the trembling fear of a victim, but with the steady, measured steps of a warrior. I looked at the jury, at the judge, and finally, I forced myself to look at the monster who was my daughter's father, and I told my truth. I recounted every lie, every act of cruelty, every calculated detail of his monstrous plan. My voice did not break. He thought that because I was poor, I was powerless, I said, my voice resonating with a strength I never knew I possessed. He thought my daughter's life was a commodity he could cash in. He was wrong. We are not worthless. We are not disposable. We are survivors, and we are done being silent. The jury's deliberation was a mere formality, taking less than 3 hours to reach a verdict, guilty, on all counts, for all defendants. The judge, a formidable woman with eyes that seemed to pierce right through to one's soul, delivered her sentencing with a controlled but palpable fury. She sentenced Blessing Nwachukwu and Samuel Okafor to 15 and 5 years respectively for their roles in the conspiracy. Then she turned her unsparing gaze upon Chike. "Mr. Okafor," she began, her voice ringing with judicial authority, "you have committed a crime that strikes at the very heart of humanity. You took the sacred trust of a father and you twisted it into a tool for greed and malice. You systematically poisoned your own child. For this, there can be no mercy." She sentenced him to 35 years in a maximum security prison with no possibility of parole. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. 35 years. It was a lifetime. Justice, swift, severe, and absolute, had finally, blessedly, been served. 2 years later, I stand on the sun-drenched tarmac of the Abuja airport, holding the hand of my vibrant, chattering 9-year-old daughter. Amara's heart surgery 6 months ago was a resounding success, funded by the marital assets Folic fought tirelessly to recover for me. She is healed, whole, and completely healthy. We are not here to be cast out. We are here to fly, on our way to a quiet beach holiday, just the two of us. My phone buzzes with a text from Captain Jamal, who has become a cherished friend, wishing us a safe and happy journey. I smile. The bulk of the settlement money did not go to a new mansion or a fancy car, but to establishing the Phoenix Foundation, a non-profit that provides free legal aid and secure housing for women and children fleeing abuse. My life is no longer defined by what was taken from me, but by what I choose to give back. As we walk up the stairs to the plane, Amara looks up at me, her eyes sparkling with excitement, her smile as wide and bright as the sky above. "Mommy," she says, squeezing my hand. "I love flying now." I look down at my beautiful, resilient daughter, and then out at the horizon, at the endless possibilities of a future we had fought for and won. "Me too, my love," I whisper, my voice thick with unshed tears of gratitude. "Me too." We were not falling. We were soaring.